Good evening. I'm Anuj Mehrotra. I'm the Dean of the George Washington University School of Business. I am delighted to welcome all of you to this episode in the George Talks Business Series. Today, we host a special edition of George Talks, as it is a collaboration between the School of Business, the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis, and the Alumni in Real Estate Industry Network. This session is brought to you with the generous support of our Board of Advisors Chair, Mitch Blazer, and Board Member Eduardo Stern, both GWSB alumni and former GW parents. Thank you, Mitch and Eduardo, for your generosity and sponsorship of this session. I'd also like to thank GW parents, Missy and Scott Schiller, for graciously helping us to host this event at this beautiful New York Athletic Club. Your kind support gives us a unique opportunity to take this show on the road from DC to Cherry Hill, New Jersey, Shanghai, and now to New York. So glad to see all of you today in the live audience, and would like to extend a warm welcome to our students, alumni, faculty, staff, and friends of the school who are here or are watching online. Let me begin by introducing our moderator first. Brian Ray is co-founder, managing partner, and principal of Alchemy ABR Investment Partners, as well as ABR Partners, his family holding company. Brian is an alumnus of the George Washington University and currently serves on the advisory board for the George Washington University Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis. Thank you, Brian, for moderating today. It is now my distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker, Mr. Charles Bendit, co-CEO of Taconic Investment Partners and owner, operator, and developer of commercial and residential real estate. Prior to founding Taconic in 1997, Mr. Bendit founded CBC Properties, and earlier in his career, Mr. Bendit was a managing director at Jones Long Wooten. A graduate of George Washington University, Mr. Bendit is actively involved in the educational community, serving on the George Washington University Board of Trustees and the GW School of Business's Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis. Mr. Bendit has also served as a regent of the New York State Board of Education, a board member and principal for A Day for Pencil, and a member of the Board of Governors of the Real Estate Board of New York. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Charles Bendit and Brian Ray. Brian, take it away.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. It is my pleasure and honor to introduce and discuss Charlie Bendit's career, one of the great developers in New York City and a great friend to many people. So I'm pleased to be here with you, Charlie. Why don't you start by talking about how you got into real estate and what was it about real estate that attracted you early in your career, and walk us through some of your key steps along the way.
Sure. Well, thank you. And thank you all for being here. It's quite a pleasure. I never would have thought back in 1975 when I graduated from GW that I'd be up here as a successful developer in New York City. Who would have thought at that point? So what got me into real estate? When I was at GW, there was a course in real estate that talked more about selling one-family homes than anything else. And when I graduated, it was 1975, and some of you may know that 1974 was a terrible recession. And I was out looking at real estate. I don't know what attracted me. First, I was interviewed by a company called Jefferson Pilot, and I decided I didn't want to be in the insurance business. Someone suggested real estate, so I started looking around, and the only job I could find was from Prudential to sell one-family homes, and that's not exactly what I wanted to do. What I learned in life is that a lot of your success is based on who you know. So my father's partner introduced me to a fellow who ran a brokerage firm, and I won't get into the hours and hours I could get into about my career way back then, but I started out as a broker selling apartment buildings in New Jersey. And what I learned very quickly was that I really didn't want to be a real estate broker. I ultimately wanted to be the owner and operator of real estate. So I spent 3.5 years learning the business, learning about apartment buildings in New Jersey. And then I took an opportunity, again an introduction by my father's partner, to a real estate lawyer who was setting up his own business to own and operate real estate. And I joined him, and I was there for about 10 months when I was offered a job to move into New York City to join a company called Jones Lang Wooten. And that was like my step into the big leagues. And I joined Jones Lang in 1981. And what was appealing to me about Jones Lang, it was a British company that was buying real estate for foreign investors. So my first deal was buying a 1 million square foot office building in Lower Manhattan. So all of a sudden I went from selling 20-unit apartment buildings in New Jersey to buying 1 million square foot office buildings in New York City. And I was buying it on behalf of a British developer who then flipped the deal to a French and Singapore-based bank. So I had the opportunity to travel to the UK, travel to Paris, and travel to Singapore. And I was 26 years old, and I said, wow, this is really cool. I did that I was there until 1993. I also transitioned. So we started buying real estate, and then we started brokering real estate, and raising money for developers also. But I always aspired to own and operate real estate. In 1989, the market collapsed, and I said, this is my opportunity. So I wrote a business plan to leave Jones Lang in 1991, and no one would back me because everybody was petrified of real estate. So finally, in 1993, I was buying a small apartment building in New Jersey, and our firm was in pretty tough shape at that time because we had expanded rapidly, and the firm wanted us to focus the energies that we had on building our business. And they said to me, you can either buy this piece of real estate in New Jersey and leave the firm, or you can drop this deal and focus on building our business. And I took the opportunity. I said, I was 39 years old at the time, and I said, I don't want to look back when I'm 60 years old and say I woulda, coulda, shoulda. So I left in 1993 and started CBC Properties. And it was great. The first 9 months was great. I was seeing all sorts of deals. It was a lot of fun. It was very exciting. I worked with Evan Pariser in helping me to finance the first 1 or 2 deals that I did. And then came 1994, and I don't know if you know the term a schneid. Well, I did nothing for a year, and I learned that it takes a while to establish a business, and there are many, many sleepless nights that I went through before things began to turn around. In 1995, I acquired my first major property here in New York City in Times Square. And that was the beginning of my success.
So it leads me to my next question. How did you form Taconic? How did you meet your great partner, Paul Pariser? And how has your vision played out all these years later?
Well, it's interesting. Paul, Evan's brother, Paul and I have known each other since 1976. So we kind of had pictures about each other. So we knew each other's
Before
backgrounds.
Facebook.
Right, before Facebook. And he was actually the one who brought me into Jones Lang Wooten in 1981. And so we worked together until 93 when I left. And he left a year later and went to work for a company called Balfour Holdings. And in 1997, they sold Balfour Holdings. And it's lonely out there when you're doing it on your own. For 4 years, I was doing everything. I was a sole entrepreneur. I ran my own numbers. I raised my own financing. I managed my own buildings. And it was pretty tough. And the opportunity to partner with someone who I've known since 1976 and worked together since 1981 was quite appealing. So we decided to get together and form Taconic. The biggest problem was he didn't like the name CBC Properties. I couldn't understand why he didn't want to do that. So we went through all these iterations. Turns out he lives off of, or at the time lived off of Taconic Road in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I lived off of Taconic Road in Salisbury, Connecticut. So we had something in common, and that was how we came up with the name Taconic Investment Partners. And shortly after we came together, by then I had 3 office buildings. I owned 1 million square feet of office buildings in New York City. I owned several hundred apartments in New Jersey. So I had a track record. And shortly after we came together and formed Taconic, we had the opportunity to buy a building in the Penn Station area. It was 400,000 square feet, a vacant office building. And right after that, we had the opportunity to buy the Sylvan Lawrence portfolio, which was a 4 million square foot portfolio. The premier piece of real estate in that portfolio was 111 8th Avenue, which is now home to Google. From then on, we went from owning 1 million square feet, which was what CBC had owned, to having about 6 million square feet under management. And from there, the rest was history.
So let's focus on that for a bit. I was fortunate enough. Charlie actually, full disclosure, partnered with me on my first development when I started my company. And I've seen the inner workings of your company and your team you build and how you run your business and your expertise and your hands-on approach. You know, how has that played out where you were able to build such a large portfolio? How did you have to adjust your business, your strategy for something that's so hands-on to have to add a team and build around a team? How have you maintained your fingerprints on your operation all these years later?
Well, I'll tell you, when I first started my business, I did everything. So when you're going from being a broker to being an owner-operator, it's a transition. As a matter of fact, it's a pretty tough transition. When you're doing brokerage, you go from one deal to the next deal to the next deal. The hardest part of it was actually having to focus on the project that I bought and making sure that it worked. And there was an enormous amount of detail. For 1500 Broadway, which is the building we bought in 1995, was significantly underdeveloped. There were huge opportunities to redevelop the retail. One of the parts of the building that hadn't been developed was signage. And we recognized this building is located on 43rd to 44th on Broadway. And it was the only building that didn't have signage. So we said, you know, maybe we could develop signage. And I remember we underwrote $250,000 a year in signage revenue. So the first deal we signed, we ended up with $90,000 a month in signage revenue. So we had about $1 million a year in signage revenue. So I had to focus on putting that into place. Then we bought out all of the retail tenants, and we did a deal with ABC, with Disney Corporation, and we created a TV studio for them on the 3 floors that we were able to assemble by buying out all the tenants. And then I had to renovate a 400,000 square foot office building. So I had to focus on an enormous amount of detail in order to get all of that done, while at the same time looking for other investments. So once I was able to stabilize that building, I was able to buy the next and the next building. And I was working 7 days a week, 14-hour days. But that gave me the understanding of what I needed from other people and what I could hand off to them if I had the right people. So once we bought the Sylvan Lawrence portfolio, which is that portfolio that we bought when Paul joined me, the first 2 people we hired was a chief financial officer and an asset manager. And I didn't know anything about what the requirements are for a chief financial officer. Just so happened my wife was a chief financial officer of JP Morgan's Real Estate Investment Management Group. So I brought her in to interview the people. I bring her in for interior decorating also, but I brought her in, and she interviewed the 2 candidates that we had as CFO. And then we hired someone from GE to be an asset manager. And we were able to delegate responsibility for day-to-day asset management and financial reporting. And financial reporting is probably one of the most important things. That's what I learned at Jones Lang, because we dealt with a lot of institutional investors, is transparency. Financial transparency is so critical. So we had a good CFO. We knew that we could develop a set of reporting expectations, fulfill reporting expectations that our investors would have, and that we had very competent managers, a manager that could oversee the day-to-day operations of the property. From there, we were able to build an organization.
So you talked about track record and how important, we all know how important reputation and track record is. You know, how did you evolve your business into so many different areas? You're in, you know, the office business, multifamily, you have lots of various interests in New York. How do you have that track record and build off of that through your own company?
Boredom. You actually, what happened in 2000, we were very heavy in office. And we said, we should diversify our business. We shouldn't be just in office properties. So we started looking at residential. And I had the background of owning or brokering apartment buildings, and I had owned a couple hundred units of apartment buildings. So we said, let's diversify into residential. And we bought a broken condominium conversion in Canarsie. It was a deal that came out of a bank, and we didn't know what we were doing. We actually brought in a partner to manage it because we thought that we really didn't know how to manage this type of real estate. Turns out we really didn't need them, but it was a great investment. We invested $2.5 million of equity. We sold it for $25 million. We bought it. We were all in for $7.5 million. We sold it for $25 million. Our $2.5 million turned into $12 million. We said, "Ooh, this is a pretty good business." And then we went right from there to buying a development site, because a good friend of mine who had actually helped us buy some office buildings, a guy named Mark Friedman, we're on a chairlift in Utah. He says, "Would you ever think of developing ground up apartments?" I said, "Sure, why not?" I never turned down a deal. And we ended up buying a site down the street from our office, never having developed apartment buildings before. And we had to go through a bit of a rezoning. We did that. And not having developed apartment buildings, we said, we should bring in a partner who knows how to develop apartment buildings. We'll learn from them, and then we'll go and do it ourselves. So we were introduced by one of our attorneys to a company called Related. And we were actually out raising money, and the equity partners said, "Well, you guys are going to sign on the completion guarantee, right?" We said, "Okay." We looked at each other and we said, "Well, how much is that going to be?" And they said, "Well, it's about a $200 million project, and you have to sign a completion guarantee for $200 million. We looked at, my partner and I looked at each other and we said, "We got to find a different way to do this." And that's when we were introduced to Related. And we did a 50-50 deal with them. And we learned a lot. We learned not only how to build an apartment building, but how to finance an apartment building. And so we did that acquisition in 2004. And we went through, we had to assemble the site because there were a number of different tenants. We had to buy out tenants. The first tenant went for, and who had the longest term lease, went for $1.5 million. And the tenant that had the shortest lease cost us $7 million. And the guy that went for $1.5 million is so annoyed with himself that he went so quickly. But we ended up building a 500,000 square foot, 400 unit apartment building, and with $8 million of cash. And by the time we were done, we had no money in the deal, and we have tremendous cash flow going forward. And we said, this is not a bad business to be into. So we have gone on subsequently, and not only have we expanded the office portfolio, but we've gotten more and more deeply embedded into the residential sector.
So I've known you probably a dozen years, and I've always noticed you're ahead of the curve. You were buying, we did medical before anybody did medical. You did...
that wasn't such a good deal, was it?
Not so good. We did you did meatpacking district. You kind of set the bar there. You were on the High Line early with Related. You're in the life sciences business now. You always seem to be a couple steps ahead of everybody. How do you prepare? What do you read? How do you gain your insights?
I always think it's better to be lucky than good. So when we bought the Sylvan Lawrence portfolio, they had this big building called 111 8th Avenue. It was the old Port Authority building. I don't know how many of you know it, but it was built by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey as an inland transportation center. It was sold to the Sylvan Lawrence Company in 1972 when the Port Authority moved to the World Trade Center. And they operated as a storage building. We saw an opportunity to buy a big chunk of real estate with big floor plates that would cater to tenants that were in multiple buildings or on multiple floors so that they could consolidate onto one floor. And that proved to be a good strategy. The first tenant we did was a company called Deutsche Advertising, which happened to be in 3 buildings on multiple floors in each of those buildings. And they signed a lease for 1 floor, which was 160,000 square foot floor. And the Donnie Deutsch, who you probably see on MSNBC, loved it because he would come in on one side of the floor and his office was on the other side, and he would be able to say hello to everybody in his organization as you went from the east side of the building to the west side of the building. And then we were able to lease to other tenants that were looking for big floor plates. And what we didn't realize is that we sat on the fiber optic network of New York City. And we did a number of deals with tenants in the fiber optic business. And we bought the building, the rents were $17 a foot. We underwrote $20 a foot. And now in the building, they're getting $80 or $90 a foot, at least Google is. We ended up doing a deal with Google. They replaced Prudential Securities, who did printing in the building. So, and then we subsequently sold it to them in 2010. But what we realized was that there was a huge demand for people to be in this neighborhood. So we started buying up real estate in this neighborhood, including the site on 10th Avenue. We got into the life science business a little bit by accident. We bought a building on West 54th Street between 11th Avenue and 12th Avenue. And we thought we were getting a good deal. It was cheap real estate. And we were approached by the New York Stem Cell Research Foundation to take space. And they built a lab space out of the building. We said, well, we must be onto something here. So we were able to lease the rest of the vacancy to biotech tenants. And now we just bought a site up on West End Avenue that was occupied by ABC, by Disney. Used to be a Cadillac assembly plant before Disney occupied it. And they're going to be vacating and moving down to Hudson Square, down just north of Canal Street. And when they vacate it, we're going to extend that business, the life science business, into that building. And then we had the opportunity to buy a site down in Hudson Square. We said, well, Disney's moving down there, Google's moving down there. Maybe we should be building a boutique office building to accommodate the tenants that are going to want to follow in their footsteps. So we just signed a contract to buy a site and build a 420,000 square foot office building there. But I think
Save some for the rest of us, Charlie. Come on.
But I think one of the things that we're most proud of is in 2013 we competed for a site that was being offered by the city through an RFP to build 10 sites on the Lower East Side, sites that had been owned by the city and remained vacant since 1955. They were parking lots. And the city went through a rezoning process. It was a very long process. They had to bring the communities together to decide what to build. And once they did that, they went through a rezoning, and then they went out with an RFP. And we were fortunate enough to win that. And we're building 9 buildings on the Lower East Side. And it's been so far a pretty good success. We took some of the GW students that were participating in the real estate program through today. I think the dean was there, and I think you'd agree it's quite a fascinating project. So we've been able to move into different areas more by happenstance than by anything else. We don't sit and think about, okay, so what's the next area? Opportunities present themselves, and then you have to justify why you're going to do it. We're going to be building hopefully 2,000 apartments in the north part of New York called Inwood. And we looked at it, and it's well served by public transportation. You have 3 city parks right around the site. You have the Harlem River, the Hudson River around this area. Said, why is this not going to work? This has to work. So we're going to hopefully be building 2,000 apartments in that area because the city sorely needs housing. And this is a great opportunity to develop a whole neighborhood.
So you sound as excited now as you've ever been about where you are in the future of the business.
Well, don't think that I haven't thought about retirement.
So let's pivot a little bit to the cycle. Everybody talks about the real estate cycle and the different sectors and industries and product types. What are your thoughts about where we are in the cycle in the commercial cycle. And I know you have thoughts on the residential business. Maybe you could share that as well.
Well, when we did this project, the 111 8th Avenue, we had a minority partner, a guy by the name of David Werner. And David Werner, he is the most prolific buyer of real estate, and he has no back of office. He operates with 2 cell phones, and he's probably made more money than most real estate developers in New York City. And he said to us, they never ring a bell at the top, and they never ring a bell at the bottom. So it's hard to know. I mean, we're in the 9th inning, and we've been in the 9th inning for the last 10 innings. So I don't know where the top is. You would say that there are all sorts of indications that we are at a top. You could say there was an inversion to the yield curve for a brief period of time, which was an indicator that we could be going into a recession. But you look at all the other fundamentals, and things look pretty good. Would I be rushing to buy another 5 million square feet of space? No, I think we're being very, very careful about what we do and being thoughtful about why we're doing what we're doing. There has to be a niche in the market that we're fulfilling. So Hudson Square, with all of the tenants moving down there, Disney and Google and all the other tech tenants there is no Class A boutique office building. And it's surrounded by high-end neighborhoods like Tribeca and Soho. So there's a reason why we think that'll work based on the experience that we've seen in the meatpacking district, where rents are $175 to $200 a square foot for office space. A deal was just done. Facebook just announced that they're moving to Hudson Yards, 1.5 million square feet. They're paying $140 a foot. Google is paying essentially $130 a square foot in the Hudson Square area. So we said, there's a reason why we should do this. In Inwood, there's a reason why we should be building multifamily there. We're building another residential building on 42nd to 43rd Street, just west of 8th Avenue. Will be a high-end boutique rental building that'll cater to a certain segment of the market. The condo market, I'm not so sanguine about. I mean, that is a challenging market. Having said that, we're building 83 condos down at Essex Crossing, but that was a deal that we made in 2013, and we made our bed we're going to have to lie in it. And our price point is okay, but the high-end condo market is really tough, which gives me more confidence in the rental market because people aren't buying, and they'd rather rent, not tie up their capital in a condominium, keep their powder dry, maybe buy a second home and rent. And their actual common charges will be higher than the rent they'd be paying in a comparable building. So, we have to be opportunistic, but very thoughtful in what we do and how we go about doing it.
So we spent some time over the summer, we were talking about the political atmosphere and the housing environment and what happened with Amazon and Long Island City. What are your thoughts on the future? Is New York City specifically still pro-business? Where do we go from here?
Well, it's becoming increasingly more difficult. When I think about whether or not do I really want to stay in this business, do I really want to continue doing this, or do I want to go play golf a little bit more? It is a lot of fun. Developing real estate is a lot of fun. It's time consuming. From the time you buy a property to the time it's stabilized is 4 to 5 years. So it's a heck of a commitment, and you really don't know what's going to happen in 4 or 5 years from now. When we did the deal with the city, in 2013, and we bought these sites, we were making projections of where we would be 6, 7, 8 years from now. And we'll be done. This is a 10-year project. So, you're in it for a fair bit of time. If we develop these sites in Inwood, that's a 10-year project. I made a commitment to my wife that when that's done, I'm done.
Until you're not.
Until I'm not. But you got to repeat the question because I forgot. I was already off on a tangent.
No, I want to understand your thoughts as a leader in our industry. Where this climate's heading.
Well, I'll tell you, it's becoming more difficult to get zoning in the city, and they just passed another referendum that says that you have to present a rezoning to the community before you even certify it for rezoning. So the communities now have more to say about what gets built. And I got to tell you, the communities are generally speaking anti-development. We saw it with Amazon in Queens, and we're seeing it in Inwood. While we just went through a rezoning, it's been challenged in court. Now, they have to challenge it on the merits, and the city did everything that it needed to do in order to qualify for the rezoning, but it's being challenged because people have the right to do so. And there are a lot of people, the NIMBYs in particular, not in my backyard, that are challenging all sorts of development. In addition to which, we have, there is a move to have prevailing wage on any project that receives any sort of city benefits. So if we're building an apartment building and we provide 30% of the units as affordable to people in the lower and lower middle income range, we get a tax abatement. And without that tax abatement, you can't build rental housing in the city. Well, then you have to build with prevailing wage. If you're going to build affordable housing, so the first project we're going to do in Inwood is 730 units. It's all affordable at different income bands. Well, we couldn't build that building if we had to pay prevailing wage. It's going to be a non-union job, but if we had to do prevailing wage and pay union wages, we couldn't build that job. Then there are other things that the city is doing. They just passed rent regulations that limit the ability to raise rents in rent-stabilized buildings. So we own 2,000 apartments in the Bronx that we bought with the idea that we were going to upgrade these properties and pass those upgrades on to the tenants. The tenants, by the way, are still paying way below market. We're 99% rented, but the rules that they just passed basically say it doesn't give you any incentive to invest in these properties. And they're 80 and 90-year-old buildings. They're going to fall apart. Many of you have probably heard of the challenges that the New York City Housing Authority has because they haven't invested in those properties forever. And they're falling apart. And they have all lead paint, they have mold, they have all sorts of problems. Well, this is the kind of thing that these older buildings are going to face in 3, 5, 7 years from now because there's no incentive for anybody to invest in those properties. Now they're passing a carbon footprint rule that will require you to reduce the amount of carbon output, I guess you would call it, from any of your buildings. None of these older buildings would be able to qualify. So you'd be paying a penalty on top of your real estate taxes because you don't meet those standards. And then real estate taxes are going up hugely. Water rates are going up. I don't know why I'm staying here, but I can talk myself out of it.
I opened up a can of worms. I apologize.
But it's it's becoming more and more challenging to develop in the city. But there are opportunities, and we'll find those opportunities, and we'll continue to grow our business.
So I know we're going to take some questions from the audience. I have one final question for myself. What is some advice you would give to your younger self? We have a lot of students here. What would you look back at your college Charlie Bendit and advise him on?
So when I started my career, I started out as a real estate broker selling apartment buildings. And about 3 years into it, I looked around and I said, God, the guys that have all the money are the ones that own the real estate, not the ones that sell the real estate. And I had a vision that one day I'd like to own real estate. It took me 18 years. It doesn't always come right away, and it requires patience. And I tell my kids the same thing. It's stepping stones. And sometimes the stepping stones aren't always linear. Sometimes you go to the left, or that's the right. Sometimes you go to the left. But eventually you get to where you want to go. And to keep your eye on the goal, but recognize that sometimes oftentimes, it takes many years to get there. I always kept my eye on the ball, and I always took advantage of opportunities. Sometimes I went backwards, but more often than not, I was able to go down that path and eventually got to where I wanted to be. And I will tell you that once I left Jones Lang and I went off on my own, as I said, there were some really scary times. And when I did go off on my own, I said, I'm going to give myself 2 years, and that's exactly what it took. It took 2 years before I established myself, established the business, and was able to be self-sustaining. And then marry a wife with a good job, you know, because she carried me for 2 years.
I can relate. So we're going to take some questions from the audience. If anybody has a question, please stand up and state your name and give us a question.
Hi, I'm Kyle Farrell. I'm a junior currently in GW Business School. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate having seen some of these properties today, understanding what it takes to really approach this market and find out what will make you successful. So my question for both of you is, as someone who is looking to enter the real estate industry, is it smart to enter in the New York City market? Or what would you say someone like me should do to find a place where I can grow and succeed and take opportunities no one else sees?
Well, thanks for that question. What makes New York City great is, number one, it's the most resilient market, at least in this country. Maybe San Francisco is pretty resilient, but New York City, every cycle that I have seen where the market has gone down, when it's recovered higher than the height of the prior cycle. And it's a place where people want to live. It's a place where businesses want to be established. There's 8.25 million people that live in New York City. There's 400 million square feet of office space in New York City. There's an enormous amount of retail. There are universities here, and the city has morphed. The city was initially a finance, insurance, and real estate, and now it's become a tech center. So it's a city that knows how to evolve. It's a city that, from a real estate point of view, is very liquid because there are always investors that want to be investing in New York City, whether they're U.S. institutions, whether they're high net worth individuals, or whether they're foreign investors. New York City is one of the top investment markets in the country, if not the world. So because of that, because of the breadth of opportunities here, and the fact that there's always been capital prepared to invest in New York City, I would say it's probably one of the best cities to invest in. You know, I look at other cities around the country, and where rental growth is something that we've always seen in New York City. You go to other markets, and rents can go up and then be flat for a very long period of time. In this city, there has always been rental growth. It may have gone down, but then it comes back up. So between its resiliency and between its ability to attract capital, it's probably one of the more exciting markets to be in.
And if I can just add, there's just tremendous opportunity here to learn from the best people in the business and to be involved in multiple transactions. You know, at this stage of your career, you want to get involved with people that you can learn from and build your relationships. So there's a lot of great cities, not just New York. Washington's a great city too. Who has a question?
You have another one?
Yeah, what are your goals still, professionally, personally?
Well, I think there's something.
I played golf with you. You're getting very good. I mean,
Okay. Well, I got to work.
I think
on
you
that.
need to be working a little harder.
I think we also have another responsibility besides building our profession. In 1997, when I had 3 office buildings, I owned and operated 1 million square feet of office in New York City, I said, you know something, I'm going to achieve more than what I set out to achieve financially. I'm going to make more money than I had a number, and I had exceeded that number in the first 4 years. I said, I got to give something back to the community that enabled me to have this success. And I thought about it long and hard, and I decided that I wanted to give back into the area of education. So I joined an organization called Pencil, which stands for Public Education Needs Civic Involvement in Learning. And what they do is they partner you with public schools. And I was partnered with a number of schools, but ultimately I partnered with a school in the Bronx called Truman High School. And we started a number of programs there to open the eyes of students to opportunities in different areas, whether it's science, whether it was in media. And the other thing I did is I started an internship program for kids, high school kids. And we started out with 2 students, and this past summer we had 600 students that we got jobs for. So I think it's important to give back and to pick an area that is of interest to you. And so I started with that, and then I was invited to join the Board of Regents, which is the policy-making organization for the Department of Education for the state. And I've been involved in other education organizations here in the city. And then I got involved with GW. I was brought in by some people that were just setting up the Center for Real Estate and Urban Analysis, and the idea of being able to develop a real estate program, a world-class real estate program at my alma mater was pretty exciting. And with Rob Valero's help and the dean's help, it really has been a great program. I think the students that have participated in the program will acknowledge that it's a lot of fun. They're learning a lot. What they're learning is directly applicable to what they might do when they graduate. And then I joined Mitch Blazer on the board of advisors to the dean of the business school, and learned a lot more of what was going on in the school and how we could give back to the school, where not only did we have a good time, but we actually learned a thing or two. And now I'm fortunate enough to be on the board of trustees. So I'm proud to say that I'm involved with education from pre-K all the way through college. I think that's a responsibility that we all have, is if we have some success, we really need to make sure that we spread the wealth by giving back to the communities that we're involved with.
That's great. Question?
I have a question. So it feels like
Please state your name.
my name's Corey Cohen, graduated in 2010. So it just feels like there's a lot of big technological shifts that are happening that would impact housing and just the idea of the city core. So I'm thinking about self-driving cars. I'm thinking about people being able to work from home with greater frequency. I'm looking at Carl Icahn moving his company to Florida. All these things kind of give pause about what the future of New York City looks like when you have 277 people leaving a day. Do you have like a long-term view on that?
Great question.
Well, that's one of the things that gives me some level of concern, is that it's not a tax-friendly place to be. It's a business-friendly place because Facebook is just taking 1.5 million square feet of space. Apple is going to be taking 1 million square feet of space. Google is expanding by another 1.5 million square feet. So technology companies are growing. The biotech sector is starting to boom in New York City. So on the one hand, you have great expansion. On the other hand, you have wealthy people saying, I'm not going to take this anymore. There was, what was that movie? I'm fed up and I'm not going to take this anymore. Well, when you're paying your state and city taxes are 13%. The state and city taxes are 13%. Your property taxes are going up. You can't deduct your federal tax. You can't deduct state and local tax on your federal tax taxes anymore. It's getting very expensive to live here, and people like Carl Icahn, whose business doesn't have to be here. A lot of people are moving to Florida. In New Jersey, a guy named David Tepper. I forget the name of his company, but he moved from Jersey to Florida, and I think they had a huge hole in their tax revenues because he was paying, I don't know how much he was paying, but enough to create a significant hole in their budget. And our elected officials have to recognize that they need to figure out different policies to keep people here that are going to add to the economy. So it is a big challenge. And then all the other things that are being done to make business more difficult. One thing I have seen, the pendulum always swings far to one side. And when it gets to a point, it starts to swing back. Unfortunately, we're swinging a little bit more to the left, and I think there's probably still more room to swing to the left before things start to come back to the middle. So yes, I'm concerned about it, and the strategies that we're employing and the types of real estate that we're developing, we have that in the back of our minds.
What do you think of the shift downtown? I mean, New York was always Midtown and Plaza District, and now it's Hudson Yards, and it's Tribeca, and it's Meatpacking. What do you think of that shift?
Well, the shift to Hudson Yards is because the real estate in Midtown is old. It's old, it's antiquated, the systems are antiquated. It doesn't accommodate the needs of today's tenant. And so a lot of tenants who were in Midtown, white shoe law firms, investment banks, are moving to Hudson Yards because it's brand new space with state-of-the-art systems, and they've created an environment over there. You may not like it, you may like it, but it's a whole different environment. The move south of 34th Street into these older buildings is because today's tenant, the young people, don't want to be in their father's office buildings. They don't want to be in those buildings that personified the establishment. They want to be in younger areas. They want to be in cool space, and that's driving the momentum downtown. I think we're going to do great at Essex Crossing. It's number one, it's brand new space, but number two, it's the Lower East Side, and there's the young people hang out in the Lower East Side in the evening. It's a true work, live, play environment. It's close to Brooklyn. It's close to Little Italy, Chinatown, Lower East Side. I read a little fact that was interesting. Between Essex Street and Orchard Street, there's 2 blocks between Delancey and Houston. There are 80 restaurants and bars. And that's, when you finish work, you want to go out, and you don't really want to go in Midtown. So I think that's why there's been a shift to other parts of the city.
That was a great question. There's another question. Evan, do you have a question?
Hi, I'm Melissa Murphy. So I'm not in real estate, but just picking up on some of the things that you said about real estate's economic contributions and some of your personal charitable contributions to education. There's a lot of socioeconomic problems in regards to education in the United States. Do you find as a business owner that it's more of a personal altruistic drive that you have, or is it a corporate social responsibility of your industry to get involved in these things?
That's a very good question. So I'll give you an example of what we're doing. So we're developing this project on the Lower East Side. We have 2 other development partners. So we partnered with the local school district. 63% of the kids of the 11,000 kids in the district are living below the poverty line, low-income people. And of that, a pretty significant part are living in homeless shelters. So we partnered with the district to establish an after-school program. We call it the City Seekers. And we introduce them to what it is to be a real estate developer. They see this real estate development going on. What does that mean? What does it mean to build a building? How many professions are involved in building a building? So we established that program. I'm on the board of the Bank Street School, and they have an education center where they do professional development for teachers in progressive education, collaborative learning, project-based learning. So we're bringing a professional development program into the district with 16 of the 30 schools in that district are going to have a professional development program that we're doing a public-private partnership. So we're going to fund half of that. The district is going to fund 20% of that, and the Department of Education hopefully will fund the balance. So we look at it not only as personally, but corporately, that we have a responsibility to the community within which we develop. We're going to be doing the same thing in Inwood, mostly for young people. Now, we also serve older communities. So in Essex Crossing, for example, we have 170 apartments are affordable housing for seniors. Unfortunately, I qualify for a senior, but I didn't qualify for the affordable component. And we have programs that we're sponsoring for seniors. We developed an urban farm. It's one of the largest urban farms in the city on the podium of one of our buildings. And we have programs with the young people in the community and the older people in the community to garden and to grow vegetables, which will be sold in the market within the building. So we're doing a lot of different things. We're building in Coney Island. We're going to be doing a partnership with schools in Coney Island as well.
That was a great question. So, Charlie, it seems like the biggest challenge in New York as it continues to evolve and explode is transportation. It's getting everybody around, get everybody to work. You know, a big part of our GW research has been walkable communities. What are your thoughts on New York as a walkable city and how we're going to overcome some of these transportation challenges?
Well, thanks for that. It's a big challenge. The Manhattan Transit Authority has to invest billions of dollars in its infrastructure. It's the same thing that happened with the New York City Housing Authority. Unless it gets to a point of complete breakdown, money just doesn't get invested. So now we're at a point of breakdown in our housing authority, and money is having to be invested. And the best way to do it is through public-private partnerships. I don't know that the Manhattan Transit, the Metropolitan Transit Authority is going to be able to do a public-private partnership, but we definitely need to invest in our system. We have the best transportation system in the country. It's probably the oldest as well, but it needs investment. And there are great opportunities to develop around transportation nodes. But we're facing headwinds in terms of rezoning these areas. The area that I'm talking to you about, that I talked to you about in Inwood, is served by the number 1 train, the A train, and the MTA, Metro North. And the neighborhood is all industrial buildings, so there's no displacement of anybody. But yet we're being challenged. We need to be able to redevelop these areas that are well served by public transportation. That's something that it has to be a mandate by the administration to rezone those areas, to provide housing, and not just housing, but retail as well, support for those neighborhoods that are being developed around mass transportation sites.
So it seems that you're always focused on transportation, and that's where the opportunities, it seems, come from to grow the city. So,
well, residential for sure. You know, the office market is centered around transportation anyway. I don't think we're going to be seeing I don't think we're going to be seeing office development in Inwood. I don't think we're going to be seeing office development out in East New York. But the commercial core is well served by public transportation. We do need to develop housing and retail that's going to support the residential development around these transportation hubs.
So I know you as a realist and an optimist. What are your projections for New York City in the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you think this city's heading?
Well, I'm kind of pregnant, so I'm hoping that it continues. I'm hoping that it continues to grow. We're out raising a fund right now to invest in office buildings in New York City, so I hope it continues. But there are headwinds, and we have to be mindful of the headwinds, and we have to be selective on what the projects that we decide to take on. And there needs to be a real good rationale. If you, in 2009, 2010, and back in 1995, you could buy anything, and the market was gonna make it all look great. Now we're a little bit more challenged for the reasons of people leaving the city because it's gotten too expensive to live here. The regulations that are being put in place. The disinvestment that's happening in some of our core real estate, the rent-stabilized housing. You know, there are headwinds, and just have to be very thoughtful about how we go about building our business.
So do we have any more questions before we wrap up tonight? Please stand up.
Karen Shaw, residential, working resident in real estate. What would you advise our next mayor to concentrate on when he or she comes into office, or the next president?
I'm gonna leave the presidential because that's too macro for me. I can focus on the micro. I think there are 3 things that we need to focus on. There are probably more, but 3 that I think about. Number 1, We need to provide more housing, and we need to upgrade the existing housing stock. Number two, we need to create incentives for businesses to be here. And number three, we need to maintain the quality of life, and embedded in that is we need to improve our education system. We need to make people feel that they can stay in the city, send their children to school here, and know that those children are going to get a good education. And we need to make it pleasant to be here. The former mayor focused a lot of energy on upgrading parks, on rezoning the city to provide for more housing. 40% of the city was rezoned during his 12 years. That is hugely significant. The whole waterfront in Brooklyn was rezoned to allow for housing. That creates a wonderful quality of life when you have housing on the river and river walks and parks. That's very important to improve the quality of life. And you have to make it business friendly. You can't impose a lot of rules, regulations, and taxes that discourage business growth here.
So I just want to say, with leaders and developers like you, Charlie, I think the city's in pretty good hands. It's always a pleasure to hear you talk.
But I only have 10 more years, and then I'm out.
It's okay. There'll be opportunities for the rest of us.
Ryan,
then.
it's up to you.
So I just want to thank Charlie for coming tonight. I also want to thank all of you in the room. I have a lot of friends in the room. Thank you for coming to support us. For everybody online, we want to invite you to the next session of George Talks Business. Our next session will be Monday at noon, and our guest will be the DC Mayor, Muriel Bowser. So thank all of you for supporting tonight's event, and looking forward to seeing all of you afterwards.